I'm here today with Nathan Aaseng. Nate worked as a research microbiologist, then spent 20 years as an award-winning freelance author, followed by 13 years as a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. Nate is the author of 170 books, and I deal with a lot of different authors, but I don't recall anyone having written that many books. So congratulations, Nate, on a very prolific writing career. Nate was honored as a notable Wisconsin author by the Wisconsin Library Association, and a starred review in Kirkus Reviews declared his stories are as addictive as peanuts. His latest book is I Wonder, Mind-Freeing Encounters with God. Nate lives with his family in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So Nate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the book, maybe you could kind of tell us a little bit more about that varied background that you have.
Well, ever since I was young, I wanted to be a writer, but I was always told it's not any way to make a living, so you better find something more productive. So when I was in college, I had an English major, and I found I was interested in biology too. So I got a biology major and an English major, and I found often that in science classes, I felt like I was an out-of-place English major, and in English classes, I felt like I was an out-of-place biologist, but it gave me an interesting perspective into it. And so my first job was one that I could get in Manitowoc, Wisconsin as a research microbiologist, where I worked a lot with actually practical things like baking bread. Red Star yeast was my project. I ended up baking bread almost every day for 9 months, testing out what I'd done. And then after doing that for about 5 years, 4 years, I think it was, I decided, I really would kick myself if I get to be retirement age, and I never really gave it a shot at writing. So I decided, with my wife's blessing, we were gonna do this. And I tried to get into some publishers and didn't have much luck until I came into a place called Learner Publications in Minneapolis. And they weren't interested in hiring me, but they asked me, by the way, are you interested in writing anything? And I almost fell off the chair because that's what I wanted to do. And then my second break was they had all these photographs of a man who's more famous for other things now, Bruce Jenner, who was an Olympic gold medal winner, and they wanted to know if I could write the story of his Olympic triumphs. And it so happened that I ran track down in Iowa at the time that Jenner was running track down in Graceland, Iowa. And so I'd been at a couple meets that he was in, and I was very aware of him. And I said, sure, I can do that. So I got that book published with some help from my wife, who taught 4th grade. And that's really the target age of it. And then from there, whatever I was interested in writing that I could get published, it worked. I worked for over 20 years as a freelance writer. And then I got to the point where, I've written an awful lot of books. Starting to feel a little like we're work. And so I looked around and I saw churches need pastors. It seemed to me very badly they need pastors. And I thought, that's something I think I can do. And so again, my wife and I talked it over, and we decided, let's do that. So I commuted to Luther Seminary in St. Paul, and I got into the clergy.
And you served at least a couple different churches during the...
Yeah, I served a church down in Creston, Iowa, a very small town, for several years. And then the last 10 years was at St. John's in Eau Claire, a much larger congregation.
Wow, what an interesting and varied career. That's fantastic that you were able to make a go of it in three pretty different industries.
Yeah, they are very different. And it was funny when I would go to writers' conferences when I was writing, the first question other authors would ask me is, so what do you do for a living? and I would tell them that all I do is I write books, and they just kind of looked at me like, well, how do you manage that? And well, if you want to write a lot of books, it's possible.
There aren't very many of the authors that I deal with that have their full income from writing. It's not an easy thing to do.
It is not, no.
So, and you've written a wide set of genre with the books that you've written. So besides the Bruce Jenner book, what other types of books have you written?
I wrote, the most famous one that I did, I guess, was called Navajo Code Talkers. And it was about World War II group. And up until I'd written the book, hardly anyone knew about them. But they had just gotten a release from the State Department or Defense that that secret could be revealed. And I wrote that book. And just when it came out, it happened that the Code Talkers were marching in Bill Clinton's inaugural parade. So, you can't buy that kind of publicity.
Yeah, really.
So that one did very, very well. I also did books on inventors. I did books on a series on Nobel Prize winners in medicine, in physics, and in peace. I did a series of books for two different publishers, fiction books for younger readers, middle school, possibly high school. One of them was a sports series of fiction books, and the other one was a series based on a summer camp, a Bible camp. And I just, it probably helped me write that many books that I didn't get stale from writing one thing. I was interested in pretty much everything I was writing. Otherwise I wouldn't have taken it, the contract. And then I wrote some devotionals, the series for younger readers, and then some for older, and then some for adults.
Now, were you able to do any of that writing while you were a pastor, or did you pretty much have to put it aside?
I put it aside for the most part. I decided I need to focus on this as best I could do. There's a website called Working Preacher that's, I was one of their initial columnists, and I wrote for them for almost 10 years. And that satisfied some of my creative writing outlet. But when I went to seminary, I needed to write in order to finance my seminary. So I was writing while going to seminary. And then when I quit that, I decided, all right, I need to take a break now, and let's focus on my ministry.
Sure. So I mentioned that the new book is called I Wonder, Mind-Freeing Encounters with God. So in describing that book to me, you said that the basic premise of the book is hard questions plus honest reflection equals deeper faith. And you also said many Christian leaders today promote rigid doctrine that says never doubt, never question. This insistence has been disastrous for the church because the first step in any faith formation is to wonder. This book seeks to revive the gift of wonder in seeking a fuller, more awesome experience of God. It welcomes unsettling questions that are too often dismissed with pat answers. Amen to that, first of all. So how did you come about with that idea? Where did the idea for that book come from?
The germ of that book came from probably just the way that I've always been. Whenever I approached a sermon, my first question was, all right, what don't I get about this? And what doesn't make sense to me? And let's dig into this and see what we can do. And then when I was an intern in Spooner, Wisconsin, I was briefly assigned to a confirmation class that they didn't want to assign me to because they called this the class from hell. And they were a group of kids they were very outspokenly challenging of everything in the church and often expressed no interest in what was going on. And I was thrown in with them one evening because no one else could take them that day. And it turned out that I felt like a kindred spirit. They were throwing so many questions and challenges at me so fast, I felt like a goalie on a bad hockey team, just coming from all over. And I said, I kind of like where this is going. Let's explore these questions. Let's not just, challenge and say that church doesn't do anything relevant. I said, your questions are valid, and people who challenge their beliefs or faith have a better chance of finding out if that faith is real than someone who doesn't challenge or is too scared to challenge. And all through my ministry, my confirmation classes, one of the assignments was always write down 3 questions that you just don't get about Christianity or the church or any of that. And then we would put those together and we would have one long session where we dealt with those questions. And I always thought that was probably the highlight of confirmation for me. And I wanted them to do that while they had somebody to talk to, rather than, okay, I'm done with confirmation now. Yeah, I don't know if any of this is real or anything, and I'm not going to look into it. I wanted them to look into it while I was right there with them. And so anyway, I was approaching sermons, I was approaching confirmation, all of this with questions. And when I retired, or just before I retired, I started putting these together in a book, my reflections on adult ed, on confirmation, in sermons. And on a hunch, I sent an email off to Phyllis Tickle. And I thought, that's pretty brassy. She doesn't have a clue who I am. And I just wrote to her and I said, do you have any advice for how to get something like this published? And I described what I was doing. And she absolutely stunned me by saying, send it to me. Send me your whole manuscript. And I said, okay, I will do that. And I sent it to her and she made a suggestion that turned the course of the book. And that was, I kind of envisioned it as a sort of a devotional Bible study almost, where you start with a Bible quotation and then go into the topic. And she said, don't do that. She said, put it all under one heading. Like what are all these things about? And what is a catchy way of describing what these are all about? And I basically said, well, it's me wondering. And I've wondered all my life, and I love wondering, and I like digging into things and finding it. And she said, go with that. And that was the last I heard from her. She died a few months after that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that gave me the spark to do the I wonder thing.
Well, good for you. I mean, Phyllis Tickle was brilliant. And,
she was brilliant, yes.
Boy, any advice that she would give, I'd certainly take it without question.
That's what I figured. I didn't really expect that she would have time for that, but wow, tremendous woman.
And so what you described about, the class with the was it teenagers, asking all the questions is quite similar to the experience that Frederick Buechner went through early in his career, where he taught religion at a private secondary school, full of all these smart young kids that were forced to be in that class and didn't want to be. Uh-huh. And, so just constantly questioning. And he felt like that was really good experience, for rigor.
It's great experience. Yeah.
So interesting that, you kind of had a similar, experience that was a forcing function for you, just like it was for him.
Yeah. And it was reinforced by a number of people who came into my congregation. I remember a couple of them said, I haven't been into a church in 40 years. And the reason I wasn't was because in confirmation, I had some questions. And my pastor said, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to question or doubt. You're supposed to take what we give you. And he said, I remember this one guy said, that was the end of it for me. And I don't know how he happened to wander into my congregation, but I let him know he was among kindred spirits here.
So talk about the content of the book, the format of the book. How did you lay it out?
I laid it out with different themes, I guess. It starts out with, I'm wondering about God. I wonder if God is real, why doesn't God show up? I mean, God could make it obvious that God is real just by, appearing in majesty and thunder and lightning and all this other stuff. Why doesn't God do that? And then I got into things like, does Lady Luck work for God? I hear all these people saying, I've been blessed by God and all these great things have happened to me. Okay, is that Lady Luck subcontracting what God, is supposed to be doing? Then I got into things like praise. Yeah, there was a time in my internship when I was leaving and they made me stand in a pulpit and they sang 10 verses of Amazing Nate, Amazing Grace. And it was one of the longest 5 minutes of my life. And I thought, if God is half as uncomfortable as I am listening to all of this praise, I got to rethink this whole thing about why are we praising God and what is the purpose of it? So anyway, all those questions about God and then questions about Jesus. Did Jesus do magic? If there was this wonderful display of angels singing in the heavens and all that stuff, then how come nobody other than these shepherds ever heard anything that knew anything about that day? And then I wonder, why did Jesus have to go through all that suffering? And wondering about the whole bit with Easter. And then I went into things like prayer. Everyone who's ever been prayed for has either died or will die. So what are we accomplishing when we're asking for prayers of healing? And then I go on to things like what's the Holy Spirit all about? What's this deal with demons? And then into some science stuff. It's my background. Can creation exist without God? Could it even theoretically exist without God? And then finally, some things about the purpose of life. What goes on if you lose your faith? What happens with the afterlife? What are we supposed to look forward to? All those questions are arranged in those topics: God, Jesus, Christianity, world, the cosmos, and the future.
Well, some very deep and fundamental topics. So that's really good for you for tackling the tough things.
Well, like I said, I kind of enjoy doing that. I've always enjoyed doing that.
And so, this begs the question, did you run out the list, or do you have another list, that you will ask questions in another book?
I certainly could. I have more wonderings that I've done.
Any plans to do that, or?
I'm waiting to see how this goes. This first book and seeing who's interested in it then.
Now remind me who published the book?
This is published by John Hunt. They're an English company. And they publish a lot of books. They're not a subsidy publisher. They are a publisher. And they looked at the book and they said, we don't think this thing's going to sell in the UK, but there's a pretty good chance that you might get something going in the United States, especially if you have some contacts. So they took it on, and I thought, yeah, let's go with them. I like the way that they do business with their flexibility and with very author friendly place.
How did you find them?
A lot of research. I spent probably a year researching publishers all over the place, and I sent queries to different places when I thought they might be interested. There were a couple of near misses, and then I thought, well, this sounds like an interesting place when I read about them, and I decided to contact them, and then they said, yeah, go ahead. And one thing I really liked about them was they give you an answer within a week. They have two people read it, and they let you know what these two people said. And then based on that, they offered a contract.
Wow.
And I don't know of any other publisher that does it quite like that.
Not sure, but yeah, I mean, that does sound unique. And they're not a publishing house that I've heard of before.
I hadn't either, and I'm surprised how large they are.
So the name of the book is I Wonder, Mind-Freeing Encounters with God. And you can find it wherever books are sold. What would be the number one thing that you'd like people to take away from it, Nate?
I would like people to take away that it's okay to wonder. And it's not only okay, it's good to wonder. And don't be passive and just let spirituality, religion flow over you. get in there, swim with it. I always think of that passage in the Old Testament when Jacob wrestled with God, and they were then named Israel, the people who wrestle with God. And that's what I think Christians are meant to be, people who wrestle with God. And I enjoy wrestling with God, and I've always found it beneficial to my faith. And I would hope that they would wrestle with God and find that beneficial to their faith.
I think there's a whole lot more openness to that than what, at least my perception is, that was the case, a few decades ago. So
I think you're right. Yeah.
I'm glad you're, pushing that envelope.
Thanks.
Well, Nate,
go ahead.
Nate, congratulations on the new book. And we'll look forward to more. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.